We go. Okay. Well, good morning, everyone. I am Brenda Bond. I'm a project consultant for the Nashville Technology Council, and I'd like to welcome you all to our Tech Coach event this morning. I'm pleased to introduce our host, Charles Cain. He is a professional agile executive coach. So some of the things that he specializes in is executive coaching, leadership development, management consulting, IT consulting, career development coaching, and project management. So I'm so thankful to have you here and for you to be sharing all of your knowledge, Charles. Thank you so much.
My pleasure.
I'm going to hand the floor over to you.
Okay. So thank you, Brenda. Thank you, Susan. And thank you to everybody at the Nashville Technology Council. And most of all, thank each and every one of you for attending this talk. When I got to thinking about this, it was like remote working. Everybody kind of takes it for granted at this particular point, but I thought it would be worthwhile to just take a trip down memory lane about, my past experiences when I was with various organizations and different companies. What was remote working like back in the 1990s, or maybe even just a little bit before the late 1980s. But we'll primarily focus in this conversation today on the 1990s, the 2000s, and then what happened during COVID, and now what is the future going to look like. So let me go ahead and start sharing my screen here. And let's see, desktop 2 and share. Okay, and we're gonna grab this, and so everybody should be able to see, the title of this stuff. We're all good? Great.
Yeah.
So again, we're going to talk a little bit about working remotely, the past, present, and the future. A little bit about myself. Brenda's already done an excellent job of introducing me. So I am the president of Cain Coaching and Consulting. I've worked in the IT industry and other areas for over 30 years at this particular point. You may have heard of some of these businesses. Viacom is one that I worked with. I've worked with CMT, MTV, VH1, BET, Paramount Pictures, retail organizations. I spent some time at a little retail organization in Brentwood, Tennessee called Tractor Supply. I've also been working with a pharmaceutical manufacturer in their marketing division undergoing an agile transformation. They're located up in Pennsylvania, known as Merck. And my current engagements, there's a little bit still at Merck left to do, and I'm working with LPL Financial down in South Carolina and San Diego. So as Brenda mentioned, I am a professional coach. I spent quite a bit of time going through a professional coaching program through the Coaches Training Institute and became a certified professional coactive coach. That's 240 some odd hours. I've coached individuals. I've coached somewhere in the neighborhood of about 60 individuals since 2014. And that's an awful lot of fun right in and of itself. So I bring both of these IT and the professional coaching aspects together to help individuals, divisions, teams become the best that they can be. So moving on. In professional coaching, we talk a lot about designing an alliance. And so I like to design an alliance whenever I give these presentations. This is not just a sage on the stage presentation. While I've got a lot of experience, I want to hear a little bit about what you have experienced in this. So we're all going to contribute to this session right here. Again, fully involved individuals I like to have. And to that point, ask any question you have when it pops up in your mind. We'll scatter throughout, and just I'll pause every once in a while and say, are there any questions? Would somebody like to elaborate on something? If you ask me something and I don't know the answer, then I'm going to tell you I don't know the answer, but then I may give you an opinion based upon my past experiences. So how does that sound to everybody?
Sounds great.
All right. Okay. At the very beginning of my professional career in remote working, uh, didn't have a whole lot of things. Organizations were, oh, you had to go into an office and you worked on a mainframe and you had to be in the building. But early in the 1990s, and probably midway through the 1990s, you started seeing more and more connectivity happening between individuals trying to do work from home and businesses that had a need for a subject matter expert, and they were located in some other area. So what had to happen is there had to be connectivity between the individual, the subject matter expert, and this location. And what we have today, we didn't have back in those days. About the fastest and most affordable connection to the internet in the early 1990s was this, what the phone companies called a T1 circuit. And that speed was, you could get about 1.5 million bits of information transmitted per second. But that cost, that was $1,000 a month, $12,000 a year that you actually had to spend just to be able to do something. And it wasn't anything like what we're capable of doing right now. I mean, we're able to do video conferencing. You couldn't do that with that T1 circuit. But what was it that you could do? Possibly we'll talk about a little bit later. Video streaming technology in the 1990s was very new. You had, at one point, the only software that a company could have to stream any videos inside their network was a service called Real Video from a company called Real Networks. One of the projects that I was engaged on was building out a website for, now it's Ryman Hospitality Group, but back then it was Gaylord Entertainment, called Cont'd. And part of the plan was we were going to take videos that were on the Nashville Network or Country Music Television, or some band would furnish us a video of them doing their latest song, and we would put it on these servers, and then people could come to that website and stream that video service. Well, in order to do that, because we knew that that's what we were wanting to do, we got what was called a T3 circuit, and it's 45 megabits. So it's roughly 30 times what that T1 was. And guess what? It was about 30 times as expensive as that T1 per month. It was about $30,000 a month. So we have the T1s, we have the T3s on the server side, the organizational side, but what do most people have at their house? I know the very first internet connection I had was a dial-up at 300 bits per second of information being able to transfer between my system and whatever it was I was connected to. How many people remember the AOL disk? I do. And I would imagine some people have probably heard the sound of whenever you were dialing up and you had all that handshake and everything else, and then you finally got connected and you thought, wow, 300 bits per second. And then they actually the technology got better, and you were able to get up to 9,600 bits per second there at your house over a regular phone line. You didn't have to have anything special. That was just the limitation of what phone lines could give you at the time because of the technology. Then along comes something called Integrated Services Digital Network, ISDN. And that was being introduced about the same time through phone companies. Well, you could actually get anywhere between 64,000 bits per second and 128,000 bits per second. So as you can see, we're starting to see a trend of what bandwidth was available to individuals such as ourselves in different areas. So what could you do with a dial-up speed? Well, as I mentioned, some of the things that I was able to do was, okay, I was able to log in, use a terminal program like Terminal or on the PC or on my Mac now, and you could connect to your Office mainframe and you could run different programs on the mainframe. And so that way, you're sending a little bit of information to the mainframe. Then the mainframe goes off and does something, and then you get that information back at some point. You could also check email in that same terminal program. You didn't have Gmail or Outlook or anything like that. You just had a DOS window and you type in mail. And then your screen would change and you could go through and hand select which message you want to read and hit enter, and then it goes off and it retrieves that mail from the server that you're connected to. That's how you checked your email back in those days. And then you could also copy files. So like today, if you were able to, if you needed to do some work on something, but the copy was on the Office computer, then you could copy a file from that Office computer by connecting using this terminal program again, or a protocol that's a file transfer protocol program. You could transfer it from your file to your computer, do a little bit of work on it, and then transfer it back over to it. So it was extremely limited as to what you could do. There wasn't a whole lot of advanced graphical user interfaces like we're used to now with Windows and OS X, and Linux now also has graphical user interfaces. We didn't have mice quite so much as we do now. So lots of hand typing, lots of waiting on things to come back and forth. So does that sound like fun to everybody? Or does it sound like pain? I see that, let's see. I see some heads shaking and some people smiling like, yeah. I remember waiting, 15, 20 minutes to get a file from something, and you had these little dots that showed the progress. And so every time you got a little dot, that means, we're getting closer to the end. And some programs will give you a percentage of how much was done. And some would even tell you what your transfer rate is. So it was very interesting. You actually had time to, start something and then go to the kitchen and get you another cup of coffee and come back, and you'd see, it changed by like 5%. So we talked a little bit about the dial-up side. This ISDN, what was it that you could do with that? Well, because the technology had gotten better and we were able to get more speed out of those same existing phone lines, you could do everything that you did at dial-up, except it was faster. I remember when I got ISDN here, compared to 9600 baud, my first connection was 128K. Boy, I thought I was in just heaven in terms of transferring files and such as that. When those dots would transfer like this on dial-up with ISDN, it was like just a nice steady stream going across the screen there. You could also listen to streaming audio. Remember that website country.com, not only did it have videos on it, it also had audio files on it. And so I could listen to audio files coming from that site. I could also stream that to somebody else. If I had the right software on my computer, then they could actually listen to the audio that I'm putting out. The problem with ISDN back in those days, it was really limited to metropolitan areas. The first time I encountered ISDN was in downtown Nashville at Opryland, and AT&T, well, yeah, at the time it was Bell South, actually came in and put in some ISDN circuits for us in the mid 1990s. But I was living up here in White House, Tennessee, and I said, wow, when can I get that? It wasn't until 1999 that I was able to get ISDN up here in White House, Tennessee. And that's only 30 miles from downtown Nashville. And it's all because the technology, what was necessary to do it, you had to have certified phone lines to run this circuit. There wasn't a whole lot of demand for this connectivity at the time. Most people were still very happy with just doing the dial-up at 9600. So to make ISDN available, there was a pretty heavy technology investment from the phone company just to get it up here, because what they had going out to communities like White House or Linda or Springfield or Fairview or places like that was still this copper line. So when what the phone companies had to do was they had to start putting in what's called fiber optic connectivity to be able to facilitate this. Questions? No questions. All right.
Glad we're in the 21st century.
So yeah, it was pretty interesting back in those days about what you could do, and what limited remote work you could actually do back in those days, especially if you used to going into an office and having immediate access to your mainframe or your servers. Then you could actually get responses pretty quick. But due to that technology deficiency between the offices and people's locations at their house, you had to scale back your desires a little bit. However, starting in the early 2000s and going up through 2020, I'm breaking it down this way. I'm calling this the middle ages of remote working. We started seeing an awful lot of investment in this technology, such as fiber optics. What fiber optics is it's a very thin piece of glass, and on each end you have a transmitter that just turns a light on and off, on and off, on and off really fast. And then on the other end you have this receiver that's picking that information up. But because now I'm able to turn that light on and off very fast, we saw bandwidth start to really increase. So we saw that starting to come into the forefront. Things such as data compression. We started seeing people were investigating ways of compressing the amount of information so that you could actually send it better and then unpack it on the other end. I remember there was a utility called PKZip, where you could take all these different files and everything and put them into a folder that gets compressed. It's the same mindset. So the creator of the files goes and takes all this, and then they compress it into a folder, and then they could send it to somebody because it's much reduced, depending on, okay, how much information is repeatable in there. And so they compressed it real heavily, and then you send it to someplace, and then you expanded it. Same concept here in terms of delivering communications. You're sending all this communication, you compress it, send it over either a copper line or these new fiber optic lines, and then you uncompress it on the other end. Of course, we all know computer hardware just really exploded in terms of power and capabilities in the 1990s. I have a MacBook Pro, the M1 version, that is right in front of me. This computer right here is vastly more powerful than the original one that I had in 2000, that stood about 48 inches tall, about 9 inches wide, and about 12, 13 inches deep. So we've seen that improvement. Also, as more and more companies such as AT&T, Bell South, Southwestern Bell, Xfinity, Comcast, all these different providers, they started doing more and more internet connectivity. Then they found out, oh, well, how do we exchange traffic between networks? The World Wide Web was only invented back in the mid 1990s, but because of the explosion of that, now all these companies had to start working together to exchange traffic between it. So there was improvements in how to route traffic, very similar to when you send a letter to somebody. You've got an address that you're sending it to, and then you put an address on the envelope of where it's going to, and then the post office figures out how to route that traffic. Same thing happens on the internet. You've got to know your source and your destination and how to get there. So there were massive amounts of improvements in those routing protocols and hardware. So we started seeing all of this come together at the end of the 1990s and into the early 2000s with regional bell operating companies and cable companies to invest in upgrading their infrastructure. So that was a really big help in a couple of respects, in that some businesses started saying, you know, we really need to find a better way of enabling our employees to work from home. Consequently, individuals, because that was getting better and the businesses were starting to invest in it, then more individuals started investing in high-speed internet at their house. Remember, I was talking about that ISDN circuit. It was about 2 years after I put ISDN in my house here, that 128 kilobits per second bandwidth, that I was able to put Comcast here in my house in White House, Tennessee. That 128 kilobits per second automatically jumped to 20 million bits of information per second being transferred. So, and it was the same cost. Actually, it's about $3 a month cheaper. So I got an increase in my bandwidth at a lower cost. So many individuals began installing that high-speed internet at their homes. I want to pause here for a second. Just get an idea from people. When did you first start getting high-speed internet at your location?
Charles, for me, I think it was around 2008, 2009.
Right. And you're located where?
I'm located in Nashville, but at the time I was located in Fairfield County, Connecticut.
Oh, yeah. 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 We started seeing pockets of installations in different regions. You know, the Northeast seemed to take off a lot faster than here in the Southeast. And of course, California, you know, that T1 at $1,000 a month. I had a colleague that had a T1 in his house because there was about 5 people all living in this one house, and they said, well, we'll share the bill. So each one of them paid like $200 a month towards that internet connectivity. But yeah, Northeast really jumped on it in a big way. Anybody else? All right. So that T1 connection, that $1,000 a month, shortly after I got the initial 20 megabits per second, I think it was about 3 months later, Comcast sends me an email saying, hey, we've just upgraded your internet connectivity capability to 100 megabits. We'll charge you $100 a month for that. Now, my ISDN bill through AT&T for that 128 was right at about $60 a month by the time you add in all the fees and everything else. So to get more connectivity again for $100 a month, plus at the time my employer they would pay it, so I could expense that off, and they'd send me a check and say, okay, here you go. So that was pretty nice. What that enabled me to do was be able to do things like this at home should bad weather arise. Everybody, you know, today's not quite so bad. I was thinking when I started composing this that we might get a little bit more snow, but remember a few days ago, there were places here in Nashville and Middle Tennessee that had 7 inches of snow. A couple of years ago up here in White House, Tennessee, the entire month of January, only 2 days were above freezing, and that month we got 11 inches of snow total. So we were all locked in, and I'm sitting up on a ridge. The roads are real hilly up here, and so it was like, okay, I was thankful that I had that good internet connectivity, because then I could do video conferences with my colleagues in New York or in London or wherever they happen to be. There was no loss of productivity if that business had invested in their infrastructure. And Viacom, I have to say, was very early on this, making sure that people could work from home, because they're headquartered in Times Square, 1515 Broadway, but people took trains and subways and all to come into town. Sometimes it wasn't so much getting into New York City, it's getting to that first leg of, okay, is the bus able to run at this point? Are the schools shut down, so I have to be able to work from home because of my family or something like that? So they were very early on in investing in that infrastructure, not only as a work productivity aspect, but also from a disaster recovery and business continuity perspective. If you couldn't get into the office, but you had to do updates on the information, how are you going to do that? So they began investing in that technology there inside their data centers to give people the right level of access and bandwidth necessary to do their jobs. I mean, they were actually able to ship video files from the servers in 1515 Broadway to individuals that had massively powered laptops so they could do what's called an offline edit. It's a low resolution edit of a television show. So some businesses started early on in that aspect.
Charles, I'm actually going to revise my answer. I think it was 2005 or 2006, because that's when my mother started playing World of Warcraft. And that's when we switched to, I'm not joking, Brenda. I'm not joking. Like, she was playing 10 hours a day. And I mean, she went to my father. She's like, listen, I'm working. All I want to do is play World of Warcraft when I get home. And and it was actually my brother's account initially, and she would play it while he was sleeping in his room. I'm not making any of this up.
Oh,
Like,
wow.
I'm not even kidding. Like, he would just put a blanket over his bed. So because it was a bunk bed and he was on the bottom, and my mom would be gaming until 2 or 3 a.m. So that was when we upgraded our internet.
Yeah.
And
That's amazing, Nadia. I love it.
thank you.
Because mama had a game at night. I love it.
Well, and I've got a brother that is retired at this point, but he and his wife had their son and daughter living at the house, and guess what? The boy would play PS3 games, PS3, PS2 actually back then, and he would actually connect with other players across Microsoft Live or Sony Live. I forget which one it was called, but then that required internet connectivity. My brother was starting to do accident reconstruction for insurance companies. He had retired from the highway patrol, and that was what he had done for the last 7 years of his job. But he had to ship all these big, massive files to these insurance companies, and so he upgraded his internet bandwidth. And then one day, my brother was working on a report that was due, and his son was off. They didn't have school, and he was playing his multiplayer games on his PlayStation, and his bandwidth started dropping. And so my brother just picked up the phone and called Xfinity, and was within like 10 minutes was able to increase his bandwidth. Of course, the bill went up, but yeah, all sorts of different things. And boy, we got World of Warcraft. Remember when Netflix first started streaming and everybody's internet was greatly slowed down in that respect. So, the 2000s were really that middle age of, we're going to find out information about this and see what all we can do. And the demand just kept growing and growing and growing from not only individuals, but from the businesses. And then we had the great lockdowns, March of 2020. I cannot tell you the number of people I've talked to prior to that lockdown that was going into offices and saying, hey, I can do this from home because my laptop is powerful enough. I have good internet connectivity at my house now, as evidenced by World of Warcraft and Netflix and such as that. How can I be allowed access to the same computers here and files here to continue working from home? And so some businesses started doing pilot programs. One of them in particular was Tractor Supply. That they started seeing that, oh, technology is getting better, and so they started moving it forward. Well, when COVID hit in March of 2020 and we all went on lockdown, these businesses says, oh, we've got to start buying hardware to allow our employees to start working from home. How many people remember the furloughs that happened because, okay, you weren't able to do your job remotely? So people went on furloughs, and then everybody's standing around twiddling thumbs or finding other work to do. COVID helped really fast track the capability of people working from home. Businesses either had to adapt by furloughing people for a certain amount of time, getting the hardware necessary to allow their employees to work from home, or they ended up closing down. There are several cases of startups that were gaining steam. However, they had to shut down simply because of COVID and not being people not being allowed or able to come into their offices and do their work. So we've talked about the past. We've talked about the Middle Ages, the 20 to 2020, the 2000s to 2020. What's my home office like right now? Well, as I mentioned, I've got this MacBook M1. My current internet connectivity with no increase of cost is 300 megabits per second, 300 million bits per second download that I can receive from the internet, from my clients. I can do these video conferences. My upload speed is 25 megabits per second. And guess what? It's $80 a month for that internet connectivity. I have Wi-Fi all over this house, so I can move anywhere from my home office to my living room to my kitchen. I can do these types of programs. I do them quite often. Matter of fact, earlier this morning, I was facilitating a discussion on a particular project at my current client, and there was 30 of us on the call, and all of us are working remotely right now. I've got teammates that are in St. Louis, Missouri. I've got teammates that are in Austin, Texas. I've got teammates that are in Orlando, Florida. I got teammates that are in Austin, Texas. I got teammates in San Diego, California. When I was at Viacom, back in those days, I worked with teams in New York City. I worked with teams in Los Angeles, California, teams in London, England, Milan, Italy, all over the globe, from right here in White House, Tennessee. So I did that an awful lot and continue to do that. Sending and receiving emails, guess what? It's a whole lot faster now. My telephone service here in the office runs on that internet connectivity. It's called Voice over Internet Protocol. You may have heard of it. You know, Xfinity offers it as the Xfinity phone. There's devices known as UMA, and so you can connect it into your house. So I've got one phone here in the office. I've even got a fax machine for people that still like to fax paperwork, also running off of that, and the phone number here in the house also runs off of that. I can securely connect to my client's IT networks as I need to. That client this morning, I have to dial into a VPN, use a VPN software, virtual private network, to connect to their network. They actually send me a laptop. Right below this one is that client's laptop. I've got two other over here to the side for other clients. So I can connect to those networks as needed to run reports, to do presentations, to upload files to certain individuals, or send them email. That's what I do each and every day. So where's the future going to go? At this point, this is projection for some of it. However, these first 2 points right here, these are today. This is as of 2022. In Chattanooga, Tennessee, the electric company, the electric power board company there in Chattanooga, Tennessee. You can have 10 billion bit per second upload and download speed in your home for $310 a month. Now, give you an idea, at that speed, you could download a 4K DVD full length in about 9 minutes and have it, you can stream it to your television or your tablet or whatever at that speed. Several years ago, that one, they only offered it up to 1 gigabit per second in both directions, but that cost was $199 a month. So now you see a 10 times increase for a 3 in speed for about a little more than $200 a month more. So businesses were able to open up. What the target was healthcare. You had organizations, you had doctors looking at high resolution images of patients needing to securely transfer them to hospitals or whomever, and you could actually send those files, and they're massively large files. You could send these to them in pretty much real time. So a couple of seconds, a doctor could be confirmed with a specialist over a patient diagnosis and send them the x-rays or the MRI files or whatever. So that's when we really started seeing that type of market explode over there in Chattanooga. Here in Sumner County, Common Electric Membership Corporation, which is a internet, which is a public utility here, is rolling out fiber optic connectivity to the internet, that 1 gigabit per second upload and download for the same price that I'm paying for the 300. Plus, you can go pay your bill in person at the same time you're paying your electric company bill. So I think we're going to see a little bit more of this as we go on. Electric companies starting to get into that type of market. Because of COVID, a lot of businesses will be pivoting to a remote first mindset. Whereas before, when I know several companies that you used to have to drive into their office, be in there at a certain time in the morning, and then you stay your 8 hours and then you drive back home. Some of those companies, for me, would have been an hour drive through downtown Nashville each way. Now, because of COVID, we have proven that productivity can happen very well and not suffer when people are working from home. What does that do for businesses? Well, now it lowers their operating costs. They don't need 320,000 square feet of office space. CMT, prime example. When CMT moved into downtown Nashville, they took on 2 floors, 128,000 square feet on Commerce Street. Because of COVID and everything else, now they only need half of a floor, 32,000 square feet, for the people that have to be there in the office. Everybody else is working remotely. If somebody wants to come in, they say, okay, I'm going to reserve a desk on this day. You don't have assigned desk in the office spaces anymore. So businesses can start reducing their building footprint, which means a lower lease payment in the case of Viacom, because they don't own their buildings. So they can lower their lease payment, which lower that reduces that operating expenditure. We also have the benefit of technology infrastructure, at least here in Tennessee, and I'm pretty sure in most of the states. Technology infrastructure improvements are considered to be capital expenditures. So if you're investing in that hardware in your data center to enable people to work from home, guess what? You can deduct that from your capital, from your budgets, and depreciate it over time. Here in Tennessee, that if you invest in a data center, there's no sales tax on things that you buy for a data center. You'll also be able to access a global community of qualified individuals to do your job. Some of my coaching clients are not here in Middle Tennessee. I had one client that was in India, and we did video conferences for our coaching sessions. I've had other clients. One was in Ireland, another one was in England. The vast majority of them are here in the United States. But just think, if you're an IT worker or you're an organization that needs IT work done, now you have access to this global community of qualified individuals because of remote working capabilities. At Viacom, we did what was work follows the sun mindset. There was not a point in time where work could not be done by a Viacom office, because the headquarters was in New York. We had offices in Chicago, Orlando, Nashville, Austin, Texas, San Diego, California, Minsk, Russia, Milan, London, Chennai, India. So we could take work that one team was working on and hand it over to another team dedicated to that, and they would work on it. So by the time 24 hours rolled around, guess what? You're now 3 different versions ahead on this particular product. So I think more organizations are going to be able to do that simply because of remote working. Here's my last thoughts. One of the things that COVID-19 caused is a refocus by individuals. We have proven that people can work from their houses as long as the business and the individuals has the right connectivity and the right tools to do the job. No longer is it a work-life balance mindset where you say, okay, I'm putting my work hat on now, and then when I get off, when I unclock, I'm now focused on my other life. It's now work-life integration because of this remote working capability. How do we mesh the two together? Because we're not Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde anymore. We are Charles Cain. We're Susan. We are Brenda. And so now we're trying to figure out, okay, how do we integrate this all together? And that's going to be the big challenge for a lot of people and organizations. That takes a different culture mindset completely. If a company has a remote first mindset and another company doesn't, there will be individuals that will take the job with a remote first company simply because it's remote first. They don't have to relocate anymore. So they may be willing to take a little bit less pay just to be able to do this. When I worked at Tractor Supply, guess what? That's 330 miles a week. That's a lot of wear and tear on an automobile, a lot of stress driving through the downtown Nashville rush hour traffic twice a day, 10 times a week, that I no longer have. I can do everything that I need to from right here. And a lot of people are waking up to that aspect of it. So 5.5 minutes left. I want to thank each and every one of you for attending this conversation, this presentation, and a big shout out to the Nashville Technology Council for putting this together. Brenda, Susan, it's always a pleasure working with you on things like this. And I do hope that you've gotten some value out of this. And so now I'm going to just open it up for any final questions that anybody may have.
I have a question, actually. I loved the overview of showing historically how we've got from there to here. And I was sharing with Brenda, like, I remember connecting my phone line to my computer and getting on AOL and just being able to text a chat back and forth with someone and thinking I was just in all of that. So, but you don't know what you don't know, right? Now we're spoiled.
Right.
And we have these crazy speeds. But my question is, since we don't seem to be as much limited with bandwidth anymore, I mean, some of us in rural counties, perhaps, but a majority of us don't really have those limits. Where do you see the limits coming from? Does it have to do a little bit with cloud infrastructure, where maybe the way that the clouds are set up and the way that we're pulling data to and from, where do you in your mind see that our limits are going to come from?
You know, that's a great question, Susan. I typically break these down into 3 different areas. I call it the origin source, the middleware, and the last mile. And so, you know, cloud computing has really taken off because of these improvements in internet connectivity. I mean, AWS would not have existed had all these changes that happened in the Middle Ages occurred. But now they go and they build these massive data centers and they pair them up all over the country. What's going to limit this is how quick, when do we get to a point to where physics takes effect and says, okay, we cannot go past this speed right here. How do we handle that issue right there of we want to give information to the last mile people, those of us at our houses, in a quicker fashion. So there is a company called Keynote Systems from several years ago that would detect where you're physically located at. Like, I'm in White House, Tennessee, but let's say, Susan, wherever you're at, you're trying to send me a file. Let's say, you know, there's a data center halfway between us and there's a data center across the country. Keynote System says, okay, the closest data center that file resides on to you is the one halfway in between us. So it's going to send that information back to the internet providers and say, for this request, I want you to route over here. That's going to be the biggest challenge. And AWS tries to prevent that or tries to address that as well by putting more data centers across the country. So they're getting the hardware closer back to it, and that's how they're going to address the physics of whenever we get to a point to where that fiber optic can't handle any more bandwidth going down that pipe. That's what I foresee.
Yeah,
Great
thank
question.
You know, I have teenagers, and you know, when they send things, they just think it goes in the ether. They can't conceptualize that data is hitting somewhere. It's not just floating around in space and waiting to come back down into their cell phone. So no, I appreciate it.
Yeah, when Cont'd.com first launched, one of the things that we did at the last, and I'm going to wrap it up here pretty quickly, was we started streaming live video of NASCAR race cars. And the demand was so popular that it would crash our data center located here in Nashville. So we partnered with a company called Akamai that did content delivery networks, and they use that Keynote Systems data, and they had data centers all over the country. And so when Susan would request to watch Mark Martin on Sunday in the Winston Cup race, they would see where she's located at, and they'd send it to an Akamai data center over closest to her. Whereas if you were in Los Angeles, California, we're going to send you to one right down the road in San Diego, California, or there in Los Angeles. And so it distributed your content closer to the individuals. And so just by doing that one thing, our servers stopped crashing. All we had to do was feed information up to the cloud, up to the Akamai cloud, and then they replicated it across their entire global network. So it didn't matter where you were in the world, you were going to get that experience from a server farm close to you. So
Cool stuff.
and we are at time.
Yes, we are. Thank you so much. Sorry. Thank you so much, Charles, for hosting our event today. And thanks to everyone for joining us. We will be having another event on Friday, March 4th. And this event has been recorded, and we will be uploading that to our YouTube channel. Again, everyone, thank you and have a wonderful weekend.
Thanks, everybody. Have a great
Thank you,
weekend.
Charles.
Stay safe.
All right. Bye now.